Good evening. Welcome to our weekly Energion hangout this Tuesday. And I'm here with Heath, Taws, and Nick May. We'll tell you more about them later. Heath, I've been told so many things about why young people are leaving the church and how unlikely it is that, say, when a kid graduates high school and goes to college, he's going to stay in the church. Now, you're off being a youth pastor. Something must have gone wrong with that program in your case. What?
Yeah, it seems like every other day there's a new blog that pops up that says 5 reasons why so-and-so is leaving the church, or 10 it's a really popular thing now. And, you never know which one is right because the blog is different, But for me, I think it helped that I grew up in the church, and my family, I grew up in a Christian family and whatnot, but ultimately looking back, it was just God's grace that kind of got a grip on me and held me in, and as sin increased in my life, grace increased even more, and I had people praying for me. But I also had 2 youth pastors growing up. Nick knows them, Eric and Keith Fagerheim. These were 2 guys who kind of just invested in my life and really poured themselves out into me, and it's what made me want to be a youth pastor and made me realize that Jesus is real, and that if they believed Jesus was real, then I wanted to believe Jesus was real, and it wasn't just something my parents had told me about anymore. It was something that I could have a relationship with and read my Bible, and it just kind of, they were so cool, and both of them were cool guys, and they kind of instilled that into me. So when I went off to college, it wasn't anything crazy to go to church, or it wasn't anything crazy to, I don't know, stay in it. Does that make sense? Kind of.
What's interesting to me, and why I'm glad to ask you, is it seems to me like at least 9 out of 10 of these blogs telling me why people your age leave the church are written by people my age.
Yeah.
And so it makes me wonder a bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think, it's a lot different. The church is different now than the way it was when my parents were there, and it's not that the gospel's changed, it's the way that we present the gospel has kind of changed a little bit. And so I think that's changed with just culture in general. Culture's told my age of people, millennials, that church is one way because it was that way when my parents were growing up, and it's not that way anymore, I think. And so how do we get those people into the doors is another question, I think, that we have to talk about.
So Nick,
yeah,
have you been reading these blogs?
Yeah, actually, it's funny because my first reaction usually when I see like clickbait titles like that say like 10
Nick,
reasons
you've been the one
why
writing.
Huh?
You've been the one writing the blogs.
Yeah. They say something like, I don't know, 10 reasons why I'm not coming to your church, and it's like first person written from like a millennial's point of view or something, and like my first reaction to those usually are like, this is this person's problem, not the church's problem, and I sort of get angry, but actually I kind of reacted to a post that one of my friends shared one time, and I got really up in arms about it just because I felt like, there's so many things that people can do to help themselves feel connected and a part of a church. But there's like this whole other side to that story that I've never really known because I've always been in church and been a part of church and been in like the inner circles and stuff. And, there's like this whole culture of rejection and judgment, and that like it's hard for me to even believe and remember exists from time to time because I just have never really experienced it. But there are people who have like experienced genuine hurt. And I think when it comes right down to it, like some of those things are masked in like the showy telliness of church. Like they don't want the show, like people don't care about all that. But I think it's more than that. I think it's less about like the fact that all churches are the same these days, and people are tired of them. I think it's just people want to belong somewhere. People want to feel loved, and that's it, you know. And so I think there's probably, again, another thing I have to remind myself of is that there are plenty of churches that just fall short of sharing that with people. Yeah. And so it causes like this stigma.
I think Nick would agree with this as well too. With our parents' generation, community wasn't a big deal because that's all they had. They knew community because there wasn't internet, there wasn't texting, all these things that they had. So you went to church for community. That was the place to go. You would find, you know, husband and wife there. You'd find friends there, all this stuff. Now you'll notice a lot of churches have to push community because it's something so foreign to our generation, really. Like we have never been more connected in our lives through internet, through email, through texting, all these things. And yet you can ask my youth kids and they'll tell you we are more disconnected than we've ever been. I mean, it's so impersonal now. So you'll see a lot of churches say, well, community is the big key. And it absolutely is. Like it's the church as a body. And that's something that I think millennials are really gravitating towards now and seeing because they long for that community. They like, a good example is my wife and I just had a baby, and who gathers around us in support? The church, right? And so millennials need that love, they need that intimacy, and they go to church and they go, well, here are these older people gathering around me, giving me something I'm not getting elsewhere. So I think that's a huge thing for keeping millennials, getting them connected, getting them in community.
We used to talk about how crazy it was. Like when our campus first launched in Pensacola, we were meeting at the college, at the university, and we used to talk about how crazy it was that students who are new on campus, who may have been a part of a church before even, before they like moved to a new city to begin school, it's so insane. They will pay money to be a part of a sorority or a fraternity that is so much, like such a big part of it is a status type of thing. But they'll like do so much to be a part of, like literally break their backs trying to get into these communities. But it's next to impossible to like coerce them to come to church, or compel them enough to be a part of a church community. Like even in addition to something like that, which was always a mystery to me, like why they feel compelled to choose one community over another. But that's like what you're competing with is the fraternity, the sorority. I mean, for that age at least.
Yeah, and everybody wants to be accepted, and so they're looking at sororities and they're going, well, here's a group of brothers or here's a group of sisters who will accept me, whereas if I grew up in the church, they never accepted me or they rejected the way I was. And so when they do come to a church, like I would say my church or Nick's church, where they're accepted, genuinely loved and accepted, they go, oh, wow, this is what Christians are all about? But I do think there are churches that don't do a good job of this at all. I mean, I think they do a horrible job of community, and they're very content with being their own little, shelter group of 170 people, whatever, and not welcome anyone. So how do we get millennials? Well, we just bring them in.
Yeah, I'm always blown away, even today, like when someone says something like, man, I didn't know. Like, I didn't know that there were churches like this. Like, I guess because I've been doing it for 10 years, 15 years now, that you just forget that there are still the churches that scare people, and it's...
I think on the opposite end of it, though, it's really weird. Like, I think you'll see, like, mega churches, like a church that has, like, 35,000 people or whatever. I think people, in turn, like those because they like to be anonymous. There are those people who are
definitely.
Or the ones who just want to blend in, not have that community. And so, in one sense, millennials I don't think they know that they want community until they actually have it. Like, I think some of them, come to church, they sit in the very far back in the cave, there's a cave in every church, and they all go to the cave, and they hide in the back, and so when people swarm them and kind of like, hey, we want to love you, we want to, talk to you and get to know you, I think some can reject it, but I think deep down inside, and the Bible attests to this, that we all have this longing to be a part of something bigger, right? We have eternity hidden in our hearts. So we long for something more. We long for communication and community and all that stuff. Just because we're made in the image of God, who is triune and all that theological mumbo jumbo,
What it seems to me, what it seems to me like here, it sounds like that what millennials are looking for is not that much different from what anybody else is looking for. I mean, I could say all of this from the time when I was 18, which has been longer ago than I want to admit, and going through college and so on and so forth. I mean, this is the same sort of thing, but also the same sort of thing I would hear from somebody else my own age.
I think it's easier as you get older. Say what?
It's just packaged different.
Yeah. I think it's easier as you get older too, because your standards kind of lower in like what you want as a community or friendship. Just give me a warm, breathing body who will talk to me. That's all. But I think when you're younger and when you're at college age or whatever, you're very particular about like who you want to surround yourself with. But as you get older, it's kind of like you let your guard down and you'll just be friends with anybody.
I mean, Nick and I grew up in the age of MySpace and having a top 5 friends list. You would fight for that top 5 friends list. Yeah, top 8. Yeah, and then they opened it up to like top 30, and it was ridiculous.
Yeah, because you had to be friendly with everyone.
Yeah, but I mean that's the thing. Like our whole thing is grown up with, these are my top 8 friends, and yet some of my top 8 friends I never even talked to, right?
These are my best friends.
My best friends, to be knocked up and down, and it was,
including Tom.
Yeah, Tom had to be on there.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you, how does a church, let's talk to people my age, how do we try to make a church more of a community? Because I go to a church with 3,500 members, and it's hard for me to know 10 of them.
Yeah.
But how do we make community?
I'll go. Yeah, I'll go first. I think the way that a lot of churches do this, I know the way North Star does it, the way Spring Run, my church, does it, is we do small groups. Honestly, it's one of the best ways to get, I think, everyone can only have 150 people or something, Brian, if you're watching this, you would know the answer. 150 people, and so after that, your capacity for knowing and remembering names and stuff like that just kind of goes out the window, So I think small groups are super helpful. My small group, I actually hang out with these people outside of my small group, which is huge, and I work at the church, but if I didn't, I would feel so connected because I love these people, and I really feel like they, care about me and my spiritual life and investing in me. And so the same thing with youth group. We have small groups in our youth group, so it's a great way for me to get one-on-one with guys. It's a great way. The girls right now, my wife's at a small group with girls. It's a great way to invest in them in a smaller setting and say, we love you, we care about you. How can we pray for you? What can we do? And so in a big church, going to your 3,500 church or whatever, I went to a very small college of like 1,200 when I went, and I knew everybody, but I didn't know everybody, right? I saw faces, but I didn't know everybody, and so the way I got connected with a small little group of friends was through clubs or through sports events, things like that. And so the more things like that a church can do, the better I think it gets. Just breaking up into smaller groups and always having that big group mentality where we're all brothers and sisters, worshiping together, but in these small group settings I can meet people one-on-one and break bread with them and whatnot.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Small groups are the way to go. But the key word is really small. Like it needs to be small. I mean, I think there's a temptation in the churches that are in the thousands, where they believe as long as they're breaking it up into something smaller. Like I heard a guy talk about a Sunday school or a small group that was like 100 people because that was like small compared to the congregation. But you even think about Jesus and 12 disciples. That's a small group, really, in my mind. That's the only way you can really experience community on a deep level, the level that you require. Another thing I think that sort of acts as its own type of small group. It just, it wouldn't be the same type of format, but just serving, volunteering, serving on some sort of team at your church, just breeds community. When I first came to North Star, I joined a small group, and it was awesome. Like I still, those people are still some of my closest friends today, and that was 10 years ago. But really, the community that I kept closest with were the people who I played music with on the worship team. Because I saw them every week. I played with them all day long on Sundays. And that type of serving alongside somebody does a lot for that. And I think a lot of people don't expect that, and they miss out on that because they think, well, I need to just come and kind of soak up what's being offered for me at church, and just kind of experience Sundays. But really, I mean, getting into a small group, getting on a team where you can serve and volunteer every single week in some capacity, that's a way that you find real buy-in and real community in a church, without question.
The dog was really annoying me, so.
Okay, well, I want to introduce you guys just a little bit. Heath, I'm going to mention you first. You're author of the book The Traveler's Advance. That's what I know most about you. But you're also a youth pastor. Just so people can get a sense of who you are and where you're coming from, tell us about your church and the youth group you serve and your family. You have a new son, so we need to hear about that.
Yeah. So I lived in Florida, Panama City, Florida, with Nick and you guys in that area, Florida area, for a long, long time. And I applied to Virginia, this church in Virginia called Spring Run Presbyterian Church. They're crazy. Apparently they liked what they saw, right? They liked what they saw, and they hired me. And I get to work with kids. I have the best job on earth. I mean, I get to goof off with kids and just kind of share my life with them. And ministry is literally it's such a tough job, but it is so much fun because you get to be life on life with people. You get to experience hurts and sorrows and blessings and grace and all sorts of stuff with them. And so I'll do youth ministry until they stop calling me Heath, until I'm Mr. Taws, and until monocles stop being cool. In Virginia, and we just have a great time. I love the job. We have a lot of cool stuff coming up. And my son, I just had a son named Thaddeus Onesimus. It's a mouthful, but it's Bible stuff. And he's 6 weeks old, and he's awesome. He's just super cool. Having a kid is one of the craziest things anybody can ever do in your entire life. So, and no sleep though. You don't get much sleep.
Yeah.
Okay, and Nick, you were probably not voted as the person in your high school or college class most likely to become a campus pastor.
Yeah, that's no way.
So tell us about it.
If you asked me 2 years ago if this was something I'd be doing, even a year and a half ago, I would say no way. And I'm very open about the fact that the title pastor still scares me and sometimes makes me cringe. But Heath and I have known each other a really long time, and he would have definitely been the one that everyone would have pinned probably to go into ministry full time.
And they were all wrong.
Say what?
And they were all wrong.
Yeah.
Come on.
No, I think, I don't know, our roles are very different, obviously, but It's an adventure for sure. I still sometimes don't see myself the way I think other people do, but I'm learning a lot. Let's just put it that way.
Nick and I have known each other for so many years, and he was my best man, and I was his best man. And when we first met, we hated each other.
Because we both dated the same girl.
Yeah, and we didn't want anything to do with each other until we went to a dance together. Not together, but separately with girls. And I was like, I was bent on hating this guy, and all we ended up doing was hanging out the entire night. Like I don't even remember. I think I went with Summer Grizel or something. She was 8 tall. And so Nick and I ended up. Ever since then, literally, we've had like 5 jobs together. We've gone to the same school together. So even though we're 13 hours apart, we still
I still hate him.
We still hate each other. Our hate transcends all barriers.
Okay. Heath goes snorkeling.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Okay, I'd like to remind everyone we do have the Q&A app active if you want to ask any questions.
Please.
You can ask these 2 guys questions. Otherwise, I'm going to have to ask them questions, and my questions will be more boring. So defend yourselves by sending in some audience questions.
We have tons of knowledge.
Yeah, ask.
So let me ask this: how has being a youth pastor and the way the youth group works changed from, say, 20 years ago? I guess that would be when you guys were in youth group versus now as youth pastors.
20 years ago? Was that real? Really?
Yeah. I was 6 years old.
Think about how long ago it was when I was in youth group.
Didn't we used to you used to ride dinosaurs and stuff? Is that what youth group was like? And
I mean, it's more than foosball and like pool and ping pong now, Henry.
Yeah. I mean the funny thing is kids haven't changed to the point where they don't like to have fun. Like literally the other day we did I go, let's go capture the flag, and kids, capture the flag is always fun. I mean, it just is, and so you can still have fun, you can still get messy and do all these things we used to do in youth group, but I just think the format of it, the technology of it, a lot of that stuff has changed. It's different, but it's the same, and it's weird. It's hard to describe the way it's different, but it feels a little different. But kids are the same. Kids like the same things I liked, We like silly games. We like to laugh at somebody who gets pie in their face, It's a good time.
My dad was always my youth pastor, so it was kind of just like being at home.
Every day. Well, Dad, why do we have to go to youth group? You're right here.
We're here. Let's just do this here in the house.
Yeah, I think youth group is, it's super important. It's just something where kids can get alone and get, be prepared to grow up in the church and, be away from their parents a little bit and have somebody, the whole idea of a youth pastor is really great. It's somebody that changed my life because they could hang out with me outside of church and, at school, and I felt like they enjoyed hanging out with me and they enjoyed these things, and it was some older guy who had gone through every experience I had. And growing up, it was my dad, right? I had the same thing Nick did. My dad was my youth pastor for years, and when my youth pastor looks at me and goes, Heath, what are you struggling with? It's my dad. I'm like, I mean, what am I going to say, right? But when I had Eric, my other youth pastor, I could go to him and talk to him, and he had knowledge for me and things, and I felt like it was somebody I could really grow in my relationship with the Lord with. So,
what does it say that our dads worked for churches and now we have just become our dads working for churches?
That's exactly right. Yeah, but cooler, way cooler.
Yeah, I think so.
Way cooler, super cooler.
Yes, you always figure you're cooler there. I always think of the things though from my days in youth group, which we were in South America where my parents were missionaries, and so I did a bit more hiking. No dinosaurs to ride on, but still. And a lot of the things, what I'm always reminded of when we have this music is I remember getting everybody in the church, because I was doing the sound system for the church, and we're playing music in between the services, and I introduced some excessively modern music, which y'all would say yuck because it would be, it's old music from your point of view, and everybody got upset. What is this junk you're playing over the church's PA system between the...
What was it, like Fanny Crosby, Isaac Watts that you were pumping over there?
Well, let me tell you, yeah, it wasn't actually, but I went to a used bookstore in North Carolina in the mountains, and I found a little song book, and I was reading the introduction. It had been published in like 1898, something like that. Yeah. And I was reading the introduction, and they said how, some people would be upset about some of the new and modern music that they'd introduced, and they were defending themselves against the traditionalists who thought their music was too current. And you look in there, and if you pull out your hymnal at your church, almost every song in that book will be in your hymnal now. So these things don't all change quite as much as we might expect.
No, and hymns are, hymns are great, and there's a lot of great bands now that are taking old hymns and putting them to modern music, and they're all over the place in church. I mean, everybody sings them, and they go, "Oh, well, that's an old hymn," and they go, "No, but it's but it's an old hymn." So.
Yeah, well, and sometimes you can also revitalize an old hymn by doing a new arrangement.
Yeah.
I mean, that's music has been getting rearranged for centuries. Do y'all have your Q&A up if you're looking?
Yeah, yes, to one.
One of you want to take that on, since you can read it yourselves?
Heath, that's kind of a you question, honestly, I think.
Yeah, I was gonna say this a second ago. The youth group hasn't really changed so much, but what has changed is the stuff kids are struggling with. And I think when I was growing up in youth group, we'd hear a kid and they go, "Did you hear about so and so? They smoked marijuana," and we'd go, "Oh!" We'd freak out and stuff. And it was really just starting to happen where a lot of kids in the church were coming from broken families and just
or they were pastors' kids.
Yeah, things would creep up, right? But it wasn't like I hear about nowadays. Nowadays, there's a lot of heavier stuff, and I think that does come from. You can blame media, you can blame technology, all this stuff. I think things are more accessible to kids, but I also think that kids are just maturing differently, and they're being exposed to things a little bit sooner than I was, but probably sooner than Nick was as well. And Nick and I will joke around about this as well, stuff that like we were exposed to as kids, and literally we say kids, and it was 16, 17 years old, right? So going to Jody's question, what do we say to them? Well, I think the gospel answers all of those questions, and you have to bring it back to Jesus. Will my friend who committed suicide go to heaven? Well, we bring it always back to Jesus Christ, right? There's a relationship that you have to have there. I think a big thing with millennials is for too long growing up in the church, I was told this, or at least I thought this, right? I probably wasn't told this, but I thought this in my head, that the reason to become a Christian was heaven. And you become a Christian, and then you go to heaven, and then everything else between becoming a Christian and heaven, you just tried your best, right? You just tried your best. And I think the message that we have to have for millennials and for my kids as well is that when you become a Christian, you don't just, heaven is not the point, it's the outcome. The point of becoming a Christian is to have a relationship with Jesus Christ, to live in his kingdom now, here and now, and do kingdom work for the rest of your life. Like, the point of becoming a Christian is a fulfilling life. It's a life of fulfillment. And yes, there will be things that pop up, right? My suicide and all these other debates that are hot issues right now and stuff. But the gospel answers that as well, right? I'm living in God's kingdom. I'm living as a Christian because Christ died for me. Now I'm free. what does that mean for this? Now that I'm free, what does it mean for this? Now, I think that's how you apply everything. You just put it through the lens of the gospel and say, what does Jesus' death mean for this? And that's what I would give an answer for. So I just put it through that lens.
Okay, well, I see we've got another one. I'll go ahead and click done on Jody's question and select the next one. And since you guys, unlike some of my more tech-challenged folks, have the Q&A app yourselves, Nick, you want to take this next one on?
Yeah, it says, do you get frustrated with some who just don't get young people? If so, what do you do to affect change in the face of resistance? So, my answer to that is, I don't get young people. I mean, at least young people who are younger than me, but that doesn't mean I just write them off. It certainly doesn't mean that I write them off. In fact, I have a harder time getting older people and being more frustrated in that direction. Like, I don't know, do I still fit in the realm? Am I a millennial at 27?
Yeah.
Am I? Okay.
Yeah.
So, I think I have to look at this through the lens of people who are younger than me, because I forget sometimes that I'm almost 30 years old. And I think that, being frustrated is a natural reaction to, I think, just not understanding someone. And I don't think it means that, like, in order to not be frustrated by young people or to, love them, you have to, like, do everything that they do and, like, be up to speed on everything that young people are into right now. Like, I've never played Call of Duty in my life, but, like, we've got a kid who loves Call of Duty and, like, playing Xbox with his friends and, like, screaming at each other. And I think that it's a sacrificial thing. Like, you gotta ask them questions. You gotta be interested in what they're interested in, and in order to help them feel welcome. You also, it's good to connect them with other people who are in the same boat. But the second part of that question, I guess, is what do you do to affect change in the face of resistance? Mm-hmm. So I guess that's sort of aimed at, like, a group of people who just don't get young people, and how I would, like, try and change them or in the face of that resistance. I think it's, like, putting it in context with, like, where they were at that age. How little little they felt like people understood them, and, like, maybe how crazy their interests were to people who were older than them at their age. And I think, obviously, like Heath said, kids are exposed to things earlier these days. I mean, we were exposed to things earlier probably than our parents were, but I don't think that's an excuse to not try and level with people. Again, it's not about, like, I've seen people go really far to the other extreme where they're way too old to be pretending to be interested in the same things that these, like, kids are interested in. So I don't know, maybe that's just a roundabout way of saying that you kind of have to meet people where they're at, honestly. I mean,
and there's stuff to learn from both. Like, the same could be said, like, do I get frustrated with people who don't get older people, right?
Right.
Like, my mom the other day, I had to explain to her what a hashtag was, what the purpose of it, and she goes, well, thank you for explaining that, Heath. Nobody ever just took the time to tell me, right? And I just wanted to, like, I'm like, Mom, like, how do you not know what
she just wanted a simple explanation.
Yeah. And so I think it goes both ways. I think young people get frustrated with old people, and older people get frustrated with young people. And I think it helps just to do something simple like that, like, hey, Mom, let me explain a hashtag to you, right? And then also just kind of, like, so I'll tell my kids, you got to understand that everybody's made in the image of God. So what does that mean? Well, it means we're all, we're all creative, and we all have these different things that we have to offer, and how do we respect other people who are made in the image of God, and also understanding that the Holy Spirit doesn't just affect one generation of people, right? He gives insights to every generation, and there's stuff to learn from both ways. But
the other thing is, you don't have to get young people. Like,
yeah.
nowhere does it say you have to get them. So,
Yeah.
like, there's not this struggle that like we can't continue to move forward in society if we don't get each other. Like, I don't think it's that extreme. Great if you can.
If you don't get young people, it probably just means like that's not your calling in the church, is to work with young people, right? I mean, like, it probably means your gifts, your spiritual gifts, like maybe with older people, like, it's not everyone's called to get them, so.
Yeah. Roy is asking, where are the bushy mustaches from the Facebook picture? I was expecting the mustaches. I feel a little misled. Where are the mustaches?
Roy.
Don't we have any Google effect mustaches?
Henry's got a really realistic Google Effects mustache happening right now.
Just for Roy.
Roy.
We'll both wear these the rest of the time.
Yeah.
Just for you, Roy.
Let me ask you that now on the. We need to solve Roy's question here since we've answered it with actual mustaches here.
Yeah.
But while we're thinking about the mustaches here, what about those who basically tend to obstruct in the church? I don't know if you've ever encountered that. I sure have, where you'll have people who are, okay, this is just, we don't want to have anything. Like, for example, a youth group that has many young people who are not church members, and people get upset about that.
Mm.
Yeah,
well,
I just read this chapter in Screw Tape Letters where Wormwood or whatever is talking to his nephew, or Screw Tape's talking to his nephew Wormwood, and he says, keep him in a party church where one group says, well, we call it Holy Communion, and the other group says, well, we call it Mass, right? And keep them separated and stuff. And so I think that's one way, we have to remember our battle is not flesh and blood, and I think Satan loves that kind of stuff when we argue about the way music should be or the way people should dress, or, there's a lot of stuff like that we argue about nowadays that's just really foolish, and it's not edifying to the church. It's not, it doesn't build up each other in love and stuff, and I think there are plenty of things that Christians can get upset about that we probably should get upset about, and rather than a little Billy who wore overalls to Easter service or something. I just think there's silly. I think there's so many silly things that people get upset about in the church that is just petty, and it distracts us from our overall mission and stuff. So
you might not want me to go too deep into my answer about that particular question, but I definitely think
go deep.
That's a pretty petty thing to worry about, like, at least concerning like a youth age person who is like just in desperate, reckless need of love, to say you're not on the membership roll. Obviously, like, we have things like membership for commitment reasons, things that help us grow personally, things that help us commit and grow in that way. I think when you lose focus on what's really at stake here, I mean, if you're in a place where your youth group is like, you've got a problem because so many kids are coming who aren't members, that sounds like a pretty great problem to have.
That's a good problem to have.
So
But the example does come from reality. That's why I was asking, right? So there are times when somebody doesn't get the young people, so to speak, in ways that you really need to do something about it. If, for example, these people are in any position of authority, how would you talk from the point of view of the youth pastor to say, look, we're doing the work of the kingdom here. What's the problem?
Yeah, I think a good thing to do is first what I would do and what I do is I rally around me people who are going to support me, right? Like our head pastor and our assistant pastor, they're super supportive of me. Some guy the other day came up to me and said, "They don't put you in a box, do they?" And I said, "No, they don't put me in a box." And so the good thing about that is before I do anything crazy or before I do stuff, I run it by them and I say, "What do you think? Is this gonna?" Yeah. So I always have a basis of support. So I'm not, running out there doing something willy-nilly where I'm going to get 20 emails from parents the next day going, "Why'd you spray paint in my kid's eyes?" You know what I mean? Like, why would I do that, right? But there are youth pastors who do ridiculous things without getting, just being level-headed and saying, well, maybe I should ask a few questions before I do this. And if you do have problems like that in the church, I think you pray about it. I think you, what does the Bible say? Go, meet with them with two brothers and talk about it and work it out. And if something can't be worked out and it's a hindrance to the gospel, I mean, that's something you need to pray with the person about and just say, I'm sorry, this has to happen, and here's a list of things why. And you're always going to hit conflicts with certain people just because change is hard, and one person thinks, well, I did it this way, so it has to work, and the other person says, well, this way works. And the beautiful thing about the Holy Spirit and the way that Jesus worked himself with was he did things differently almost every time, right? Like he spit in the mud and put mud on some guy's eyes, and I bet the disciples are going like, well, what? That's not the way you cleanse that guy the last time. Well, this time I'm using mud. You know what I mean? So I think the beautiful thing about the Holy Spirit and the way the church is creative is that everybody comes from different angles, and the weirdest stuff on earth has worked in the past that I would have never thought would ever work. So.
Okay. What about getting young people involved in the church as a whole? Church services, leading, even speaking, that sort of thing. I know I experienced recently, a youth Sunday, and the youth did everything, and we had the sermon from from one of our graduating seniors, and I thought I could really deal with this more than once a year. What do you think about that?
I think there's probably two ways to address this, and one is probably from the perspective of like a teenager, or I guess, or in the context of a teenager. Like, I think it's great if they're at a place of maturity where you can give them some of that leadership leeway to be able to help in the ministry. Like, I think that's awesome. I think it's like probably one of the best ways that you can form a connection with other people their age. The other way I think to view it is like the opposite end of like the millennial scale, being like someone my age who's like, I'm leading a group of people who are for the most part older than me, or at least in a big portion of them are, or have been walking with Christ a lot longer than me, and it's weird even to me to be in a position of leadership, like with people who in a lot of ways raised me. There's a family I've been friends with for almost my entire life, and they pretty much raised me and had so much to do with what I believe and how I grew up, and now I'm effectively in a position of leadership over them. And it's the weirdest, most surreal feeling ever. But,
And you're power hungry, so it's like it just feeds your ego.
Yeah, yeah. It makes me just sick with power.
Well, with power and pride.
Yeah.
Well, but it also says something that people who raised you are willing to be part of the congregation with you in leadership.
Yeah, well, no, that's true, and I think that's only because of their maturity, because they realize that God works in ways that aren't necessarily based on human measured credentials. You know what I mean? Like it's, I was put in a position of leadership, and that's, you know, in a lot of ways enough for them, you know. And you know, I think a lot of it comes from knowing me and trusting me, but they also know when to speak up and when to, you know, not speak up. And you know, it's overall it's just been pretty astounding to me, like, to experience the patience that people have for me. And I know that won't last forever. Like, I know that someone eventually will come along the line who just thinks I'm an idiot, and they'll probably be right. You know,
multiple people.
What'd you say?
Probably multiple people.
Yeah, everyone will
probably more than 20 people will rise up and overthrow oligarchy.
Probably bury me in a ditch.
It could happen, you know.
Okay, I'm going to turn the corner just a little bit on this and ask you the question: should church be interesting? Heath?
I'll go. Yeah. I'll use what's the theological word I'll use is winsome. It should be winsome. I think interesting changes based on what. So if I think rap music is interesting and I go to church, I'm going to be real disappointed because I didn't get entertained. You know, maybe one Sunday I'll rap. I don't know, and that'll feed that need. But I think we're called to church to have a relationship with God, and I think that's interesting. I think that relationship is what should bring people back, and you know, church is ultimately about worship. It's something we're called to do. It's something, you know, God knows we need it. God knows that we come and we need that community. We need to hear the gospel. We need to be reminded of it every week because I forget it every single week of my life, right? I have to be reminded that what Jesus did for me was super important, and here's why. And you know, if my wife and I are sleep training right now, trying to sleep train our baby, and it's literally hell on earth. And so I need to be reminded that Jesus died for me, and I can extend grace to my 6-week-old baby who doesn't know any better. And where do I learn about that? Well, from the Bible, taught at church, encouraged by community. So I would say, as a young adult, as a young kid, I would come to church to be entertained, but I left with Jesus. And I left even more entertained once I realized that relationship, how powerful it was. Then when I went for something like fluff, right? Then when I went for the games, or I went for my youth pastor or something like that, I went for the food, right? And I left with the joy of knowing Christ. And so I think some people come to be entertained, whereas others kind of come because they think it's a duty. And I honestly think it's kind of a little mix of both. I think you should come for the relationship, not for the entertainment, and not for the duty. I think you come out of love. Same reason I come home every day, because I love my wife.
Yeah, I think interesting can you know, sort of cause you to fall into dangerous territory. But I think a better word is compelling. Like, I absolutely think church should be compelling, because being compelling has to do with you know, your enthusiasm and your excitement about who Jesus is and what he means. And if that comes across in a compelling way to people, you know, just like, you know, the scripture says, you know, go out to the highways, the hedges, compel people to come so my house will be filled. You know, like, that is that's a command. Like, be compelling. And I think being compelling can get confused with being interesting on like a surface level. But like Heath said, it's more about like who Jesus is, and that's what's compelling. And if you're if the way in which you see him and deliver him to people is compelling, then I think it'll in turn be interesting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a big problem is a lot of times we tend to think of the next big thing, right? And so we keep trying to build and build and build and build. And so the person who wants to know relationship is going to come and go, well, last week we did a concert. This week, we have dancing bears. What's next? And on the outside, they're coming for the dancing bears and they're not hearing anything. So I think when they come and you like, if I go and I see Nick and he's sitting there laying into me, and preaching the gospel and telling me, these things I need, and my heart hears that, I think I'm definitely going to come back next week because my heart knows I need that, and that is compelling to me. Like, and I think that part of that's the pastor's job, to be compelling and to show the gospel and the beauty of it and all that stuff. Just the way like a poet would make poetry beautiful and stuff, and same painting, all that stuff, same way.
Dancing bears help a ton.
I don't want to discourage churches from hiring dancing bears because that's a huge draw. And so, yeah, that's a huge thing. We need to keep doing that.
Okay. What do you think, though, should be part, then, of a worship service? You've talked a little bit preaching, and you've used the word worship, but do you have some particular idea of what should happen on a Sunday morning?
I think there's the Western culture idea of what happens on a Sunday morning, being that everyone corrals into a room and faces forward and sings songs and listens to a guy tell them something that they didn't know before. But I don't know. I would say that the components of a worship service should involve some sort of some sort of outcry of thanksgiving and praise and worship. But we do that in the the context of music, and then we teach and tell stories the way Jesus did. I really think it's a lot based on kind of what the Bible shows us, but I think really it's about people gathering for the sake of fellowship in Christ, and sharing that with each other. So there's things that we do because of the culture we're a part of, and because people in the South go to church on Sunday morning, and people sing songs, and they listen to someone wiser than them, or who they perceive as wiser than them, tell them stories from the Bible. But I think it's a cultural thing, but I also think it's very biblical.
Okay, guys, we're running down on time. We have just a little bit over 5 minutes. And so what I'm going to try to conclude here is with a question: do you feel hope when you look to the future of the church? Why or why not? Starting with Heath and then Nick, and then I'll tell people what's coming up on our next hangout.
I absolutely feel hope because like I said earlier, the gospel hasn't changed. The good news hasn't changed. Jesus hasn't become any less righteous last time I checked, and he's not going to. And so God is good. His promises still stand, and the Bible says all of God's promises are yes in Christ. And this week we're going to be celebrating the big yes, right? The check that God wrote and cashed with his Son. The empty tomb, we're celebrating all of that, and so that means that there is hope for all of us, and there is absolutely hope for the next generation.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I definitely believe there's hope. even when it does seem hopeless. I think there's a big thing that needs to happen. Honestly, between churches, where we need to stop sort of seeing each other as competitors and realize that we're all, for the most part, in the same work, and yeah, unity. But I think that's a huge thing, because it can cause so much discouragement in churches who are not quite as progressive or popular. But I think it's important to know that we're all doing the same. We're all doing the same thing. We're all working towards the same goal. So I definitely believe there's hope. I would say, especially with millennials kind of coming into the helm of church, we just need to remember and remind ourselves to seek wisdom from people who are older than we are and have done it for a lot longer, I believe. So
yeah, and Nick's right about churches that need to we kind of need to just share our hurts with one another and realize that one church may not know how to do something, so they need to share that knowledge with the other church. And knowledge needs to be shared between one another. We don't need to kind of hoard it for our own and say, well, this is mine and this is how we do things, and so it works. And we need to share that with other churches and kind of just work together and aim towards the future. Stop being against so much stuff, and instead love each other and realize we're hurting, and just work together. Yeah. Look to Nick.
Yeah.
He's the wise.
I've got a youth pastor goatee and everything.
Okay. Well, I've been talking here with Heath Taws and Nick May. Heath is a youth pastor, and he's also one of our authors here at Energion Publications with the book The Traveler's Advance. You can find that on our website at direct.energion.com or on Amazon.com. If you want to do a search, you'll find it. It's The Traveler's Advance. And Nick is the author of 3 books, Mega Belt, which says all kinds of things about churches, Minutemen, which we don't have time to really describe, and Mole Cricket, which is a more literary work. They're kind of in a way, they make a trilogy. He and I discussed that the other day at the hangout, whether they really were a trilogy or not. So anyway, those are our the 2 guests. This coming Tuesday, I'm going to be talking with author Steve Kindle about his book, I'm Right and You're Wrong, Why We Disagree About the Bible and What to Do About It. So we'll be talking about Steve and talking about how we often read Bible passages and disagree. So that will be next Tuesday night at 7 p.m., also via Google Hangouts on air. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and have a great night.
Let's go see if Mark Driscoll approves.